Welcome to the comfy zone. Make yourself at home.
I still don't really understand what happened to me at work the other day. I work in a fairly large office building. It's the kind with multiple floors, sleek meeting rooms, a cafeteria, and other things to keep the staff happy throughout the workday. Lately, I've been working on a project with another guy in my department named Mike. We both got hired around the same time 3 or 4 months ago, but never really connected much, other than when we answered icebreaker questions during orientation for new hires. I've always been more introverted, and Mike seems to be my polar opposite. He's always quick to crack jokes, and he makes friends with everyone he meets in the office pretty much right away. If he had a real-life character sheet, he would definitely have a few extra points in charisma. He's a very nice guy though, so when we got paired up for a presentation last month, I looked forward to working with him one-on-one. It's your standard office job presentation, a PowerPoint about how some of our product updates are projected to boost sales. Really interesting stuff if you're into that sort of thing. A job that Mike took on was going down into the printing room and getting copies made of whatever we needed for the presentation. The thing that bugs me about it is that he always takes way longer than it should really take him to get the copies made and come back to our floor of the building. I mean, every time he leaves, it's a mystery when he'll return. A few times he's left and it's taken an hour or more to get back. Maybe he's just chatting with people around the office, as he's known to do. After a while, I began to feel like I was doing all the heavy lifting with this project, while he was just messing around, making friends. A couple days ago, I decided to go with him to get our copies and see what he was getting up to when he left. Mike didn't seem to realize I was joining him to find out what always takes him so long, and he really seemed glad to have me join him. As we walked together toward the stairs to get down to the printing room, he was sure to say hello to any of our coworkers that weren't obviously busy, but it didn't really take up as much time as I had imagined. It was maybe a minute or two before we got to the stairwell. Between the flights of stairs on each floor, there's a doorway. We exited to the stairwell to head down 3 floors to the copy room. It's always seemed a little eerie to me how quiet the stairwell is compared to the rest of the building, but I usually take the elevator anyway. We walked down 2 flights of stairs, that's 1 floor, another 2, that's the next floor, another 2, and that should have been our final stop. But here's the thing, Mike kept going. Mike was moving at the pace he might take if he was jogging, walking down the steps with the bounce in his step. I hesitated and tried to get his attention, but it seemed like he was oblivious to anything around him. I stopped for a moment just below the floor with the copy room to see if he would also stop, since I realized we had gone too far. When he noticed I had stopped, he slowed down and looked back up at me momentarily, then laughed quietly and shook his head, before he gestured for me to continue going downstairs with him. I tried asking him where he was going, but he just kept going down the stairs at the same pace as before. It took me a moment to catch up to him, because he only slowed down for a moment when I had stopped. Eventually I was right behind him, because I didn't want us to take up both sides of the stairwell in case another employee needed to use it. "What are we doing, Mike?" I asked. "We really need to get to the copy room so we can keep working on the presentation." Mike just shook his head again, kept up his pace, and looked up at me over his shoulder and said, "You'll see. I've got something amazing to show you." Not wanting to make things any more weird than they already were, I followed Mike down a couple more flights of stairs. I couldn't imagine going back up all these stairs once we had reached whatever it was that Mike wanted to show me. It was about that time that I realized I was already getting a little worn out. My calves started to burn and I could feel myself slowing down. Mike, on the other hand, kept up the same pace. At least I assumed he was keeping up the pace because I was slowing down and I could barely keep up with him and stay on the same flight of stairs. I felt a sudden twisting pain in my stomach and an intense foreboding feeling when I realized after not being able to keep up for 4 or 5 flights of stairs that our office building only has 11 floors. At this point, we must have gone down at least 10 floors, even though really I had lost count. What really made me feel nauseous was when I remembered we started on the 7th floor. It brought up that feeling you might get as a kid when you lose a parent at the grocery store and the whole world around you seems unknown. At this point, I was so far behind Mike that I had to raise my voice when I tried to get his attention and get him to stop. Nobody told me this building has an underground floor before. Is it an underground parking garage or something? I asked, trying to catch my breath. Mike just kept going, seeming almost giddy and childlike as he bounced down the steps. Mike! I called out. Mike slowed down and looked at me over his shoulder once again, quickly looking back down to watch his step. Mike, nobody told me this place has a basement, I said, trying to keep up with him. Without even looking at me, Mike slowed down a bit and, like he was trying to catch me by surprise, he suddenly responded, We don't! Only a moment before, I had thought he was slowing down, but it immediately seemed like he had been charging up for what he was about to do next. Without any warning, his casual bounce down the steps suddenly became something between an all-out sprint down the stairs and leaps down multiple steps at a time. It seemed like something you would see in parkour videos. His sudden change in demeanor somehow made the pit in my stomach grow larger and deeper. I knew we had different personalities, but I never could have anticipated such a manic shift out of nowhere. In that moment, I was faced with two options. I could turn back and act like nothing happened the next time I saw him, or I could follow him to see what he was up to. I chose to turn back. I had to catch my breath, and the tapping of his shoes on the steps began to sound like it became more distant with each tap. The noise echoed through the stairwell, and I looked up to gauge how far down we were. The flights of stairs seemed endless. I hoped that I was at least on a level that had elevator access to get me back to our floor. So I walked back up a few steps to the floor that I had just passed. It may have been the shock of Mike's strange behavior that made me think we were higher up in the building than we were, but I realized there was no door to the building at this level in the stairwell. I walked up 2 more flights of stairs and my legs were killing me. I turned another corner expecting a door, but there was nothing. My heart started racing, so I walked up the next couple flights of stairs in a near panic. The next floor was the same as the previous 2. There was no way back into the building. My breathing became quick and shallow. I tried to look up the stairwell to see if I could see any doors, but all I saw was stairs and railings. I could hear Mike's distant steps continue for a few more seconds before they completely stopped. Mike! Hey man, come on, I said between breaths. He must have heard me despite how deep he had descended, because the next sound I heard was the pounding of his feet, like he was trying to climb multiple steps at a time to get back up to me. The only thing I could hear at the time was the echo of my own breathing and the sound of Mike's footsteps coming back up the stairwell. I peered over the railing to see if I could even see him and realized the lower sets of stairs almost seemed to never end. I saw Mike's hand grasping the railing towards the inside of the stairwell, and his face came fully into view. As he climbed the steps at least 2 or 3 steps at a time, I watched as he stared me down intently. His mouth was moving, and his eyebrows shifted like he was in the middle of a conversation, but I couldn't understand what he was saying. My breathing sped up again as he climbed the staircase, never breaking eye contact. I could make out the tops and bottoms of the white parts of his eyes, and felt like he was staring straight through me. He was still a little too far away for me to hear clearly, but it seemed as though he was talking to himself as he approached me. He continued climbing the stairs, his shoes pounding and slapping against the concrete steps, never looking away from me. When I could finally hear him, he sounded like he was having a conversation, but it was clearly not one I was a part of. You never know with these types of things, man. Some days you win, some days you lose. I heard the same thing from a guy I knew back in Seattle. One of these days the wife and I will need to give it a try. Can you believe what they did to our team last night? You ever drive one of those? Best investment I ever made. I heard he's retiring. We going all in on lunch? Not once did I hear him stop to take a breath. He just kept talking. Before too long, I realized he was halfway up the last set of stairs below me. Yeah, looks like rain until Thursday. You've got to check it out later. I'm gonna have to haul it inside for now. Have you heard from Paul? The actors they cast for this one are just ridiculous. The way he stared at me, even as he was climbing past me, was one of the most disturbing things I've ever witnessed. He continued climbing and talking, and I stood there paralyzed with dread. A moment later, I saw he was still looking directly down at me as he ascended a few steps at a time. Even when I couldn't hear his voice, I could see his eyes. After 2 or 3 more flights of stairs, he suddenly turned. I heard a door squeak open, and it slammed shut behind Mike. I looked up to my right and realized I must have overlooked the doorway. I ran to the doorway as quickly as I could, with my legs feeling like they were reinforced with popsicle sticks. When I opened the doorway, I realized we were on the 4th floor with the copy room we usually used. I entered the office floor feeling like the world was spinning around me. Toward the middle of the office floor, I saw Mike standing at the desk of a woman I had never met, catching up and making small talk, folder of papers in hand. He looked over at me and said he needed to get back to work, before waving goodbye to a few others and walking up to me and tapping the folder of copies to my chest. I took the folder and he patted me on the back, while I just stared at him, my legs on the verge of collapsing. Mike gestured for me to come with him. Reluctantly, I walked with Mike to the elevator, but I was relieved we weren't going back into the stairwell. I was still in shock, but didn't want anyone to think I was acting strangely, so I tried to act natural. We entered the elevator alone. As the elevator began to take us back up to our floor, Mike looked toward me. "You know what, man?" he asked. "You're a good guy. I'm glad you came with me." I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't. I stared straight ahead, waiting for our stop. The elevator stopped at the 7th floor and chimed to let us know we had arrived. As the doors began to open, Mike leaned in, his hand partially covering his mouth for secrecy, and added, "Just don't tell the boss about all the small talk I've been making on company time, okay?"